Hi everyone, it's Katrina. Number 10. The Temple of the Nabatayans. In one of the biggest archaeological discoveries in years, researchers uncovered an underwater temple in Italy that once belonged to the Nabatayans. The ancient Nabataean temple is complete with beautiful marble altars and a rich history dating back 2,000 years. It was revealed off the coast of Naples in the Gulf of Pozzuoli. Scientists think it came from the Roman period and that it was built in the first part of the 1st century AD. That means the temple coincides with the rise of the Roman Empire and the heartless destruction of the Nabatean kingdom. The Nabatayans appeared in the Arabian desert in the 6th century BC, establishing some of their first settlements east of Jordan. It's not clear where these powerful people came from, but they soon made a name for themselves as savvy traders. They settled in the great city of Petra, which they carved into the rock by hand, and they also took control of the spice trade. As they grew wealthier from merchant caravans and greedy nomads, their influence and territory started to expand, eventually stretching into the Haran and Levant. Oddly enough, they had no interest in agriculture for the first 400 years of their development. It wasn't until around the 2nd century BC that they became more of an organized society, deciding to make their own food and living more sedentary lifestyles. The biggest issue for the Nabatayans was that their power was a direct threat to the Romans. In 65 BC, soldiers of the Roman Republic arrived in Damascus and ordered the Nabatayans to surrender. 2 years later, Rome destroyed Petra, forcing the Nabatean king Aretas III to pay tribute in order to avoid being annihilated. But even with the tribute paid, the Nabatayans were assimilated into the Roman Empire in 106 AD. The Romans then renamed the Nabatean kingdom, calling it Arabia Petrea instead, and designated it as one of their own provinces. One of the cities that became part of the Roman Empire when Petra was destroyed was Pozzuoli. It was established by the Nabatayans to be a commercial port in the Mediterranean area. For whatever reason, though, the city sank. It was likely because of the rise in sea level and the general decline of the city once the Nabatayans weren't in control of the spice trade any longer. Researchers have already found sacred buildings standing alongside rows of warehouses where goods were stored. Before the Romans got greedy, the warehouses were packed full of merchandise that would have been shipped to the Roman Empire. Number 9. The sunken city of Heraklion. If you were a merchant in the 8th century BC, Egypt was likely one of your best customers. If you happened to be a merchant from anywhere in the Mediterranean, you needed to bring your exotic goods to Egypt, meaning you'd have to dock your vessel at the trading port of Heraklion, located near modern-day Alexandria. This was the doorway to Egyptian trade, and the first port for merchant ships coming from other places in the Mediterranean. Heraklion was one of the most impressive port cities of the ancient world, but it was lost 1,300 years ago. Around 700 AD, the whole city just kind of slipped into the sea and sank down to the bottom. The city was then forgotten and all traces of it were lost, and it wasn't discovered again until the year 2000. That was when renowned French archaeologist Frank Gaudio discovered the ruins of Heraklion submerged in Abu Qir Bay. Gaudio and his team have been meticulously excavating and exploring the sunken ruins ever since they found it. They have uncovered over 64 shipwrecks, accumulated more than 700 ancient anchors, and more. The team has discovered so many maritime relics, they believe beyond any doubt that Heraklion was a mandatory stop for all trade between the Nile and the Mediterranean. It's believed Cleopatra had a palace here and may have even been buried in this very city. As for how it sank, that's still a bit of a mystery. The best guess scientists have is that the city was devastated by a series of earthquakes and was subsequently swept into the sea by a massive tsunami. And now for number 8. But first, I want to give a big shout out to Rebecca Guzeta and Heaven Moore. Thanks so much for watching and supporting this channel. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and join the family, and let us know what videos you'd like to see in the comments below. Number 8. Deep Sea Graveyard. Off the coast of Florida in 2016, an amateur diver made a shocking discovery. They came across buried human remains beneath the water near Venice. And as it turns out, those human remains are over 7,000 years old. The amateur diver unsuspectingly came across a Native American burial ground, an underwater graveyard that had been lost for centuries. When the findings were announced, Ken Detzner, Florida Secretary of State, called them unprecedented, with other Florida residents saying they hoped the human remains could give a better understanding of the ancient civilizations that once lived in the state. In most cases, human remains that are left in the water decay quite rapidly. It's almost impossible to keep something properly preserved when it's being nibbled on by creatures and marine organisms. However, this case has been a bit different. The human remains were preserved inside of a freshwater pond with a peat bottom. The peat was responsible for preventing the bones from being totally destroyed for 7,000 years. Researchers even found the remains of wooden stakes, grave markers from a time scientists refer to as the Archaic period. Back then, the water level in the Gulf of Mexico was 30 feet lower than it is today. It's hard to imagine, but that's how much the sea level has risen in just a few thousand years. As the water continued to climb, the burial ground found itself completely swallowed by the ocean. Unfortunately, it's not entirely clear which ancient group created the graveyard. Timothy Parsons from the Division of Historical Resources said those buried here in the Gulf of Mexico are ancestors of living indigenous people. Archaeologists have been working closely with the Seminole tribe in Florida to ensure the remains are cared for with the utmost sensitivity and respect. And scientists are currently trying to come up with a preservation plan to preserve the watery graveyard, while also, of course, collecting data to better understand ancient history. Number 7. Sunken volcanic chamber. Near the Greek island of Santorini in the Mediterranean Sea, researchers found a never-before-seen volcanic magma chamber. The chamber is part of the volatile submarine volcano that nearly wiped out the island of Santorini 400 years ago. Researchers were shocked to see the magma chamber currently growing, filling with liquid magma. And just like a balloon being filled with water, the growing magma chamber has to burst at some point. According to researchers, this will cause a massive eruption within the next 150 years. It could be tomorrow, but it could also take place 3 generations from now. The submarine volcano is about 4 miles from Santorini, hidden underneath the ocean at a depth of 1,640 feet. It's called the Columbo volcano, and it's one of the most active in the world. Its last eruption was in 1650, and it caused the deaths of about 70 people. If the same volcano erupted today, given the increase in population, the results would be even deadlier. To study the volcano, scientists from Imperial College London used what can only be compared to a medical ultrasound. It's called full waveform inversion and involves using a seismic wave to look inside the Earth. Sound waves were bounced through the rock, creating an image of the underground volcano structure. At the very bottom of the volcano, at a depth of around 12.4 miles, the team discovered the presence of a deep mush zone. This is like the boiling blood of the planet. Much closer to the surface, above the dikes carrying magma toward the bottom of the sea, there is a small reservoir that continuously receives new batches of magma. It's located just under 2 miles beneath the sea floor. It's progressively being fed from much deeper in the earth, and at some point, the whole thing is going to blow its top. Research confirmed the magma chamber has been growing steadily ever since its last eruption in 1650, and now it's just waiting to go off and cause utter devastation. Number 6. The unknown wreck. In 2019, dive operator David Ronan discovered an unknown shipwreck off the coast of Eastbourne in the UK. David got into contact with archaeologists from historic England, who then got to work investigating the waterlogged remains. They blocked off the site so that only divers with permission were allowed to enter, and then they examined the mysterious pile of twisted wood and metal. After some time, they were finally able to identify the wreck. The ship is called the Klein Hollandia, and it sank over 300 years ago. The vessel belonged to the Admiralty of Rotterdam and was built in Holland in 1656. The ship was involved in the Anglo-Dutch War between 1672 and 1674. But a few years after the war, the ship was surprised by an English squadron and was blown to bits. It subsequently sank to 105 feet beneath the waves and wasn't seen again until 2015. It was spotted during a hydrographic survey, but David Ronan was the first to officially see it and identify it as a shipwreck. If the English were good at one thing, It was keeping records early on of their military missions. We know that in 1672, Admiral de Hayes was escorting the Smyrna fleet to the Netherlands, but when they passed the Isle of Wight, they were attacked by an English squadron commanded by Admiral Holmes. The skirmish went on for 2 days and saw fierce fighting from ship to ship. The Klein Hollandia was badly damaged and boarded by the English, who learned very quickly that they'd made an awful mistake. Just as the English were boarding the ship, it suddenly sank, and the warship took English and Dutch sailors down with it. The destruction of the Klein Hollandia was a critical event in English and Dutch history. The actions of Admiral Holmes, attacking the ship unprovoked, started the Third Anglo-Dutch War, which lasted until 1674. Number 5. The bottom of Lake Ontario. An underwater drone recently discovered something strange at the bottom of Lake Ontario. A group of researchers were funded by the OEX Recovery Group Incorporated in 2017 to recover a piece of history hiding at the bottom of the lake. The mission was codenamed Raise the Arrow and was kept under great secrecy while it was underway. The main goal of the mission was to recover one very particular piece of history, and perhaps some lost treasure too, if they found any. For hundreds of years, there have been rumors of treasures, artifacts, and even lost settlements hiding underneath the surface of Lake Ontario. The recovery group simply wanted to find something, anything at all, to make their efforts worthwhile. If you're not familiar with Lake Ontario, the main thing you need to know is that it's huge. The lake formed during the Ice Age when the Wisconsin ice sheet melted. Scientists believe the lake is still expanding as glaciers continue to melt and water levels keep rising. The lake has 634 miles of shoreline, not to mention all of its islands. Lake Ontario connects to the Niagara River, which is where Niagara Falls is located, and in total, 9 other rivers flow into the lake. Researchers used an underwater drone to explore the limitless depths of Lake Ontario. The drone, named Thunderfish, is equipped with an extremely powerful camera. The team used it to scour 400 cubic miles of previously unexplored water. They didn't find any lost artifacts or pieces of history from a forgotten civilization, but what they did find was a fully intact aircraft, the very thing they'd gone looking for in the first place. The drone revealed a plane, but not just any plane, it was a jet fighter, and it had been hidden at the very bottom of the lake since the 1950s. The aircraft was identified as an Avro CF-100 canoe, nicknamed the Clunk. It was one of the most advanced jet fighters when it was created in the mid-1900s and remained active in the Canadian military until the 1980s. It was designed so perfectly that it flew faster than any other plane. And interestingly, the Avro was integral in leading to the discovery of how to overcome the sound barrier. In total, 9 prototypes were created, and for some reason, one of them wound up in the lake. Have you ever found anything interesting underwater? Let me know in the comments, and while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. Number 4. The drowned Nazi bunker. It's been over a decade now since marine explorers discovered an unknown structure at the bottom of the Baltic Sea. The mysterious structure was spotted between Sweden and Finland and looks an awful lot like a spaceship covered in sea sediment. It was the Swedish Ocean X diving team who identified the anomaly while treasure hunting in June 2011. They picked up the object on sonar image and were shocked to see something that resembled the Millennium Falcon from Star Wars. The mysterious object looks exactly like a UFO that hit the water, crashed into the bottom of the sea, and then left a skid mark in its wake as it lost momentum and came to a stop. Based strictly on these sonar images, the object does appear to be artificially created. It has sharp edges, straight lines, and is about 200 feet in diameter. It almost looks like a perfect circle, something you don't see often in random chunks of rock. The team of scientists received so much publicity from the image that they returned to the Baltic Sea the next year to get more sonar scans. They also recovered stone samples from the site to better understand what they were dealing with. But all they learned was that the anomaly is composed of loose volcanic rock. So it's important to separate fact from fiction here. There are stories about the Ocean X researchers having difficulty with their equipment. Their sensors and photography tools supposedly stopped working when they got above the object. There were even reports that the team suffered electrical interference, and their satellite phones stopped working when they got close to the unidentified structure. And when divers went down to take a look at it, They allegedly found passages leading into the earth and mysterious dome compartments like man-made caves carved into the formation. However, none of these reports have ever been verified, and we don't have any proof that the scientific team had problems with their instruments during their investigation. According to scientists at Stockholm University, the structure is made of ordinary rock. Author Simon Andrews says that unless an intelligent alien life form built its ship from stone, it likely isn't a vessel. According to some conspiracy theorists, it could be a secret Nazi bunker instead. Those who believe this say Hitler had an underwater bunker built and then lowered into the Baltic Sea, fueled by his insane obsession with the story of Atlantis. But again, this theory has never become a proven fact, and for the time being, mainstream scientists maintain the Baltic Sea anomaly is nothing but a normal rock formation. Well, that's boring. Number 3. Underwater cairns. Lake Constance borders Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. It formed thousands of years ago when the Ice Age came to an end and the Rhine Glacier melted. Along its shores, researchers recently explored a series of prehistoric burials. There are at least 170 submerged burial cairns along the edges of Lake Constance, evidence of Mesolithic hunters who lived in Europe during the final days of the Ice Age. Researchers have never found any permanent dwellings here from the Stone Age 12,000 years ago, and there's absolutely nothing that suggests Paleolithic humans settled in the area. Instead, archaeologists have found the ruins of hunting camps, scattered tools, and other evidence of Mesolithic nomadic activity. Hunter-gatherers were definitely visiting the area 10,000 years ago, camping and chasing the migrating herds of animals as Lake Constance formed. They didn't begin to settle here until the Neolithic period, which started around 9,000 or 7,000 years ago. That was when they started building coastal swamp villages and pile dwellings, just when Lake Constance was really starting to get full. The string of burial cairns were dated to be about 5,000 years old. The cairns were identified when archaeologists discovered a 12-mile-long line underneath the water, running parallel to the shore. Each burial cairn is huge, measuring nearly 90 feet in diameter and 6 feet tall. They form a straight line as if they were built as some sort of funerary road. Urs Lusinger from the Museum of Archaeology of the Canton of Thurgau suggests the burial structures were built by multiple villages on the lake. This is an excellent example of social gathering and early community cohesion, but nobody knows what the burial cairns were used for aside from burying the dead. They may have been involved in cultic activities or god worship, but what we know for sure is that as the lake continued to fill with water, the villages and the burial mounds were all submerged. Number 2. World War II shipwreck. The wreckage of a transport ship that sank in 1942 has just been discovered near the Philippines. The ship is called the Montevideo Maru, a Japanese transporter that functioned during World War II. At the time it sank, it was carrying over 1,000 prisoners of war from Allied nations. But a U.S. submarine didn't realize the ship was full of Americans, and instead believed it was an enemy vessel ready to be destroyed. And so, the American submarine launched torpedoes at Montevideo Maru, ripping the ship apart and killing the Allied prisoners on board, most of which were Australians in the process. To this day, the sinking of the Montevideo Maru was the deadliest sea event in Australia's history. Researchers have been looking for the wreckage for years, and finally, in 2023, decades of work paid off. A non-profit organization founded by the descendants of one of the Australian POWs was behind the discovery. John Mullen from the Silent World Foundation and his team found the ruined boat at a depth of 13,000 feet. That's almost halfway to the bottom of the deepest part of the Mariana Trench. Number 1. A lost canoe. The tribes of the Pacific Northwest were masters of the rivers and streams that move through the land like veins in the human body. To maneuver through these waterways, they learned how to be skilled craftsmen of canoes and could build them in all shapes and sizes, which they used as their main mode of transportation. Even after European colonists arrived in North America, the canoe was still the main way to get around. Obviously, this wasn't as much the case in the deserts of the Southwest. However, in most parts of North America, the canoe was the only logical way to travel. A trio of teenagers went for a swim in the summer of 2021 and found an amazing example of a canoe from before the days of the Europeans. The canoe is nearly 1,000 years old, and was hidden in the depths of Lake Waccamaw in North Carolina. This is a major piece of Native American history and one of very few canoes from that time that's still in one piece. After the teenagers made the discovery, one of their families got into contact with the local state archaeology services. Archaeologists then came down to the lake and helped retrieve the 28-foot wooden relic. Chief Michael Jacobs of the Waccamaw Siouan said the canoe would have carried many brave people in its day. It was crafted from cypress wood, likely used by a fishing community who lived at the edge of Lake Waccamaw. Because it was buried so effectively in the mud and sediment at the bottom of the lake, it remained remarkably preserved. You can still see the intricate carvings and artistic designs carved into the wood. It took a long time to remove the canoe from the lake, but it was worth it in the end. The retrieval was a community effort involving local Native American groups, the families who live near the lake, and archaeologists. From what we know, the Waccamaw Siouan tribe has been in the area for 10,000 years. That makes their culture older than the Egyptian civilization. And yet they are only one of the 8 recognized Native American tribes still living in North Carolina. They were forcibly removed from their ancestral land in the 1800s and have been fighting for their dignity ever since. Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time. Bye!